The slap echoed in the quiet twilight of the small town's main street. It was a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the hum of the diner's neon sign and the distant rumble of a passing freight train. Ethan Sterling's handprint bloomed red on Sarah's cheek. Her gasp was a stolen thing, a wisp of air in the sudden, suffocating silence. His friends, two shadows flanking him, snickered. "See? I told you I'd shut you up." Ethan sneered, his face a mask of privileged arrogance. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like claws. "You think you're better than me? You and that freak uncle of yours?" From the cab of the old, rust-pitted Ford parked across the street, a low growl rumbled. Max, the German shepherd, pressed his nose against the glass, his dark eyes fixed on the scene. He was old, his muzzle dusted with gray, his body a road map of scars from a life of service far from this quiet town. But his instincts were sharp, honed in places of sand and fire. He saw the threat. He saw his girl in pain. With a surge of strength that defied his age, Max launched himself against the half-open passenger window. The worn latch gave way with a metallic shriek. He landed on the asphalt, his paws scrabbling for purchase before he broke into a dead run. He was not a pet. He was a guardian. He hit Ethan Sterling's side like a furry battering ram, a blur of black and tan fury. The boy cried out, stumbling back, his grip on Sarah broken. "Get this thing off me!" he shrieked, his bravado instantly curdling into panicked rage. Max did not bite. He did not need to. He stood over Sarah, a low, menacing growl vibrating in his chest, his body a living shield. Ethan, humiliated in front of his friends, recovered his footing. His face was contorted with fury. He saw the dog not as a protector, but as an object of defiance. He drew back his leg, his expensive boot a pendulum of malice. The kick landed square in Max's ribs with a sickening thud. The dog yelped, a sharp, pained cry that tore through the air and collapsed onto his side, his breath coming in ragged, shallow pants. Sarah screamed, a raw, desperate sound, and scrambled to Max's side. At that moment, the door to the diner swung open. John Creed stepped out, a receipt in his hand. He was a tall man, built with the dense, functional muscle of a life spent carrying heavy loads over long distances. His face was stoic, his eyes a pale, watchful blue that seemed to take in everything at once. He saw the scene in a single, frozen tableau. Sarah on the pavement, her hand hovering over the whimpering form of his fallen friend's dog. He saw the sneering boy and his smirking cronies. He saw red, but his movements were cold and deliberate. He folded the receipt, tucked it into his pocket, and started walking across the street. His steps were silent, measured. He was no longer a man trying to find peace in the quiet countryside. He was a SEAL, and his charge was under fire. The world seemed to slow down. The neon light of the diner cast long, distorted shadows. The laughter from Ethan's friends died in their throats as John approached. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply advanced, an implacable force of nature. He stopped a foot from Ethan Sterling. He did not look at the boy's face. His gaze was fixed on the trembling dog on the ground. "You touched my dog," John said. His voice was unnervingly quiet, a low vibration that carried more menace than any shout. Ethan, buoyed by a lifetime of getting his way, puffed out his chest. "That mutt attacked me, and you'd better watch who you're talking to. My father owns this town." John's eyes lifted slowly from Max to meet Ethan's. For the first time, the boy saw what was looking back at him. It was not anger. It was something colder, something utterly devoid of emotion. It was the look of a man who had made life and death decisions in the blink of an eye. "Let go of her," John said. He had not even seemed to notice that Ethan's friend still had a loose grip on Sarah's other arm. The friend, a boy named Travis, froze. He looked from John's face to Ethan's, seeking guidance. He found none. He let go of Sarah as if her arm were red-hot iron. John knelt, his movements fluid. He ran a practiced hand over Max's ribs, feeling for the extent of the damage. The dog whimpered, licking his hand. John's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Sarah, at the tear tracks on her face and the bright red mark on her cheek. He stood up. "This ends now," he said, his voice still quiet. But now it was a promise, a vow. He looked at Sarah, and for a fleeting moment, the coldness in his eyes was replaced by a fierce, protective warmth. "I promise you." He scooped Max gently into his arms. The dog was heavy, but John held him as if he were weightless. He started walking back toward his truck, Sarah following close behind, her hand clutching the back of his jacket. "Hey, I'm not done with you," Ethan shouted, his courage returning with distance. John did not turn around. He did not stop. He placed Max carefully on the passenger seat, then helped a trembling Sarah into the truck. He closed her door with a soft click. He finally turned to face Ethan Sterling. "Yes," John Creed said, his voice carrying across the empty street. "You are." He got into his truck and drove away, leaving the three boys standing in the flickering neon glow, suddenly feeling very small and very cold. The call came an hour later. Sarah was in her room, the door closed. John was in the kitchen, carefully wrapping Max's ribs with a compression bandage. The old dog was quiet, his breathing still labored, his head resting on John's knee. The vet, a man John trusted from a town 2 counties over, had already been called. He was on his way. John's phone buzzed on the counter. The number was unlisted. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Is this John Creed?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with condescension. "Who is this?" John asked, his hands never ceasing their gentle work on Max. "This is Richard Sterling. I believe you had an unfortunate encounter with my son, Ethan, this evening." "That's one word for it," John said. A dry chuckle came through the phone. "Mr. Creed, I think you and I need to come to an understanding. My son is young, he makes mistakes, but he is my son. This town, this county, it understands that. We take care of our own." "Your son assaulted a child and injured an animal," John stated. It was not an accusation, it was a fact. "Allegedly," Sterling corrected him smoothly. "And it seems to me that what really happened was a simple misunderstanding that got out of hand. A misunderstanding I am prepared to compensate you for. Generously. Let's say $50,000 for your trouble, for the vet bills, and for your silence." There was a long pause. "Should teach your son that. Sterling should teach your son that." Sterling's tone hardened. The silk glove came off. "Listen to me very carefully, Creed. You are new here. You do not understand how things work. You are a guest on a property that, frankly, is an eyesore. I could make your life very difficult. I could have that shack you live in condemned. I could make sure that little girl's life is a living hell at school. You have no idea what you are starting." John stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness of the surrounding woods. He thought of David, Sarah's father, his teammate. He thought of the promise he had made to his dying friend to look after his family. A promise he felt he had already failed once. He would not fail again. "You're the one who doesn't understand," John said, his voice a flat line. "You think money and influence are power. You're wrong. I'm going to show you what real power is. It's the truth. The truth? Sterling laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. The truth is what I say it is. Not anymore, John said. You and your son are going to pay for what you did. I promise you that. He hung up the phone before Sterling could reply. He stood there in the quiet kitchen, the only sound the soft breathing of the injured dog. The war he thought he had left behind had found him. It had come to his front door, and this time he would not be fighting for a flag or a country. He would be fighting for a family. The next morning, John took Sarah to the sheriff's department. The building was small, brick, with a sagging American flag out front. The man behind the desk, Sheriff Brody, was large and soft, with a face that seemed permanently flushed. He listened to John's account with a look of profound boredom. He glanced at the faint bruise on Sarah's cheek and sighed. Son, you have to understand, Brody said, leaning back in his creaking chair. Ethan Sterling is a good kid, a bit of a hothead maybe. And you're telling me your dog, a big German shepherd, attacked him first? My dog defended a child who was being assaulted. John corrected him, his voice level. Look, I've got 2 of Ethan's friends who say the girl was screaming at him, making a scene, and the dog just came out of nowhere. It's a he said, she said situation. Brody said, spreading his hands. And frankly, with Richard Sterling involved, my hands are tied. I'll have a talk with the boy. That's the best I can do. John looked at the sheriff. He saw the flicker of fear and compromise in the man's eyes. He saw the Sterling money at work. I see, John said. He stood up. Thank you for your time, Sheriff. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and disappointment. That's it? They're not going to do anything? We do this together, John said quietly as they walked out into the bright morning sun. This was just the first door. We'll find the right one. The next door was the high school principal, a man named Henderson. He listened patiently in his office, his fingertips steepled. The school had a new gymnasium, a gift from the Sterling Foundation. Mr. Creed, I understand your concern, Henderson said. But Ethan is a student with a bright future. Sarah is new. She's had a difficult time adjusting. Perhaps she misinterpreted the situation. We have a zero-tolerance policy for bullying, of course. But we also must be careful not to ruin a young man's life over a misunderstanding. It was the same word Sterling had used. Misunderstanding. It was the word they used to wash away the crime. The system was not broken. It was owned. The harassment began that afternoon. Sarah's phone lit up with notifications. A social media page had been created. It had pictures of her, unflattering ones, with cruel captions. Lies. Vicious, targeted lies. Kids at school she had never even spoken to were sharing it, laughing. When they got home, the tires on John's old truck were slashed, all 4 of them. John looked at the flat tires, then at the house. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. This was an escalation, a probe. They were testing his defenses. Stay inside, he told Sarah. Lock the doors. He spent the rest of the afternoon changing the tires, his mind working. He was a man trained to assess threats, to analyze enemy tactics. Sterling was using a classic campaign of intimidation. Isolate the target. Apply psychological pressure. Demonstrate reach and impunity. That night, a rock crashed through the living room window. Sarah screamed. Max, still sore but back on his feet, barked furiously, standing between Sarah and the shattered window. John was there in a second, pulling her away from the glass. Taped to the rock was a photograph. It was a picture of Sarah, taken from a distance, walking home from the bus stop earlier that day. Underneath it, a single sentence was scrawled. "You can't watch her all the time." John looked at the photo, at the crude threat. This was no longer just about a spoiled teenager. This was Richard Sterling, a man who believed he was a king, putting a peasant in his place. He felt the familiar cold rage rise within him. It was an old friend, a companion from firefights and interrogations. He had learned to control it, to channel it into a weapon. He looked at Sarah, who was crying silently, her body shaking. He saw not just David's daughter, but every innocent person he had ever failed to protect. He picked up his phone. He scrolled to a number he had not dialed in over 2 years. The contact name was simple: Ghost. The phone rang twice. "Creed," a calm voice answered. No hello, no preamble. "Ghost. I need the team," John said. There was no hesitation. "Where are you?" "Northwood County. I have a situation." "Hostiles?" "Domestic. A wealthy local tyrant and his son. They've escalated from threats to direct action against a protected asset." John's voice was clipped, professional. The asset was Sarah. "Asset compromised?" Ghost asked. "Negative. But the perimeter is soft. The local infrastructure is compromised. Law enforcement and civil authorities are non-cooperative. I'm operating in a denied area." "Understood," Ghost said. "Oracle is on a plane in 3 hours. He'll bring a package. I'll make a few calls. Find you a lawyer, someone who speaks our language. Stay hard, John." The line went dead. John felt a sliver of the weight on his shoulders lift. He was not alone anymore. The network was being activated. The righteous had been called. 2 days later, a nondescript van pulled up the long gravel driveway. A man with glasses and a perpetually distracted air stepped out. This was Marcus, known to the team as Oracle. He was a genius with anything that had a circuit board. "Got your party favors?" Oracle said, opening the back of the van. It was filled with black Pelican cases, surveillance gear, encrypted comms, night vision, things not available on the civilian market. "Ghost said to give you the deluxe package." While Oracle set up a secure network inside the house, John took Max and went out to the old barn. It was a dilapidated structure at the edge of the property. Its wood gray and weathered. His grandfather had built it. John had been meaning to clear it out, to turn it into a workshop. A project to keep his hands and mind busy. Now, it had a new purpose. It would be their command center. As John started moving old, dusty farm equipment, Max began to act strangely. The dog, his ribs still wrapped, started sniffing intently at a corner of the barn, where the dirt floor was covered by loose, rotting floorboards. He began to dig, his paws sending dirt flying, a low whine in his throat. "What is it, boy?" John asked. Max ignored him, his digging becoming more frantic. He was obsessed. John, trusting the dog's instincts that had saved his life more than once, pried up the floorboards with a crowbar. Beneath them, in the packed earth, was the corner of something metal. John's heart hammered in his chest. He took over from Max, digging with his bare hands until he unearthed a small, rusted metal lockbox. It was old, the kind a child might use to keep treasures. The lock was corroded shut. He carried it back to the house, his mind racing. Who had put this here? And when? Oracle looked up from his laptop. "What's that? Buried treasure?" John placed the box on the table and, with a heavy-duty bolt cutter from his toolkit, snapped the lock. Inside was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and warped by moisture. Beneath it lay 3 cassette tapes. John opened the diary. The handwriting was a young girl's looping cursive. The first entry was dated 25 years ago. The name on the inside cover was Jessica. Jessica Riley. John's blood ran cold. Jessica Riley was a local legend, a girl who had vanished without a trace 25 years ago. The official story, pushed by the then sheriff, was that she was a troubled teen who ran away. Her case was cold, forgotten by everyone but her grieving family. He began to read. The diary started with teenage hopes and dreams, but the tone quickly darkened. It spoke of a secret relationship with an older, powerful man. A man who was charming at first, but then became controlling and then violent. A man who gave her gifts, but also bruises. A man who threatened her, told her no one would ever believe her if she told. The name was there, written in a shaky, terrified hand. Richard Sterling. The final entry was chilling. He knows I'm keeping this diary. He found it. He said if I ever told anyone, he would make me disappear. He's coming over tonight. I'm so scared. I'm hiding this under the barn floor. If something happens to me, please, someone find this. Please. John looked at the cassette tapes. Oracle, seeing the look on John's face, took one and gently loaded it into an old player he had brought as part of his gear. He pressed play. A young girl's voice, trembling with fear, filled the room. It was a recording of a conversation, a confrontation. Please, Richard, just leave me alone, Jessica's voice pleaded. Leave you alone? A younger Richard Sterling's voice sneered back, unmistakable in its arrogance. You belong to me. You think you can just walk away? I own this town. I own you. You will do what I say, or you will disappear. No one will even look for you. John closed his eyes. The dog had not just dug up a box. He had dug up a ghost. He had unearthed the rot at the very foundation of the town. This changed everything. This was not just about an assault on Sarah. This was about a pattern, a history of predation and, very likely, murder. Oracle, John said, his voice tight. Digitize these. Encrypt them. Send them to Ghost. Ghost's network moved fast. The lawyer he found was Frank Miller, a former JAG Corps prosecutor with a bulldog's tenacity and a deep-seated hatred for bullies. He flew in the next day. Pro bono. This is it, Frank said, his eyes gleaming as he read the transcripts of the tapes. This is the predicate. This establishes a history of violent behavior and a pattern of silencing victims. This isn't just about your goddaughter anymore, John. This is about him. The next piece of the puzzle was Amy Chen, an investigative reporter for a state paper. She had been chasing rumors about Richard Sterling for years, hitting a wall of money and fear at every turn. When Frank called her and gave her a sanitized summary of the new evidence, she drove to John's property that same day. I knew it, she said, her hands shaking slightly as she held a copy of the diary entry. I knew there was something more to that girl's disappearance. They silenced everyone. Her family moved away a year later. They were broken. The alliance was formed. The soldier, the tech, the lawyer, and the journalist. A network of the righteous against an empire of corruption. They began to work, using the barn as their base of operations. Oracle dug into Sterling's finances, finding shell corporations and payoffs. Amy and Frank started tracking down other potential victims, other people who had been bulldozed by the Sterling machine over the years. They found a former contractor whose business was ruined after he refused to cover up a safety violation. They found a woman who had been fired from Sterling's company after filing a harassment claim, forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. One by one, the ghosts of Richard Sterling's past were being given a voice. But as they built their case, Sterling felt the pressure. He felt the shift in the unseen world. His surveillance became more aggressive. Cars would park at the end of John's driveway for hours. Drones would occasionally buzz over the property, which Oracle quickly neutralized. Sterling was a predator, and he was beginning to feel cornered. He decided to send a final, brutal message. Sarah had started to feel a sliver of hope. She saw the team working, saw the resolve in John's eyes. She started to believe that justice was possible. Her friend, a girl named Maya, was one of the few who had stood by her, refusing to believe the lies online. One afternoon, Sarah was walking home from Maya's house. She took a shortcut through a small wooded park. Max was with her, a loyal shadow at her heels. They were halfway through the park when 3 figures stepped out from behind the trees. It was Ethan Sterling and his 2 friends. "Look what we have here," Ethan said, a cruel smile on his face. "Walking all alone. Where's your bodyguard now?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "Leave me alone, Ethan." "I don't think so," he said, advancing on her. "My dad is pissed. He said you people need to learn a lesson. A permanent one." Max moved immediately, planting himself in front of Sarah, a deep growl echoing in the quiet woods. "Stupid dog," one of the friends muttered, and swung a heavy tree branch he was carrying. It caught Max on his side, and the dog yelped, stumbling but not falling. Sarah screamed and tried to run, but Ethan grabbed her, throwing her to the ground. "You're going to learn to keep your mouth shut," he hissed, his face inches from hers. What happened next was a blur of vicious, cowardly violence. They kicked her. They punched her. Max, despite his injury, kept trying to get to her, biting at their legs, distracting them, taking more blows meant for Sarah. Can't win, make them pay for it. Can't win, make them pay for it. Get something. DNA. A piece of clothing. Something they can't deny. As Ethan loomed over her, she reached up and scratched his face, digging her nails deep into his skin, tearing away flesh and blood. He roared in pain and slapped her hard across the face. Her head hit the hard-packed earth, and the world went black. The boys, panicked by her stillness and the blood on Ethan's face, ran. It was John who found them. He had a tracker on Sarah's phone, a precaution Oracle had insisted on. When she didn't arrive home, he knew. He followed the signal to the park. He saw Max first, lying on the ground, whimpering, trying to crawl toward Sarah's still form. Then he saw her. She was lying on her back, her face swollen and bruised, a trickle of blood coming from her lip. She was so still. Something inside John Creed broke. The cold, controlled rage was gone. The disciplined soldier vanished. In his place was something primal, something ancient. It was the fury of a father, a brother, a protector who had seen the one thing he treasured most in the world, broken and discarded. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he felt for a pulse. It was there. Faint, but there. He gently gathered her into his arms, his movements impossibly tender. He looked at her battered face, and a single hot tear traced a path through the dirt on his own cheek. He had made a promise to David. He had made a promise to her. He carried her out of the woods, Max limping faithfully behind him. At the hospital, the doctor's words were a distant buzz. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, severe bruising. She would be okay. She was lucky. Lucky. John stood outside her hospital room, looking through the glass at her small, still form hooked up to monitors. Frank and Amy stood beside him, their faces grim. The police found her DNA under Ethan's fingernails, Frank said quietly. But his father has already hired a team of lawyers from the city. They're claiming self-defense. that she attacked him. John didn't seem to hear him. He was just looking at Sarah. Clear his throat. He turned to his team. The look in his eyes was one they had seen before, in the moments before a mission went from planning to execution. It was an expression of absolute, final resolve. "The by-the-book approach is over," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "They tried to kill a child. They tried to kill my child. The system won't punish them. So we will. We are going to burn their whole world to the ground." He looked at Amy. "That live interview you wanted with Richard Sterling. Make it happen. Tell him it's for a Man of the Century award. His ego won't be able to resist." He looked at Oracle, who had arrived at the hospital. "Can you override a live broadcast feed? Can you insert your own audio?" Oracle pushed his glasses up his nose. "Is a frog's ass watertight?" John looked at Frank. "Get Detective Miller, the state cop, the one you said was clean. Tell him to be ready. Tell him I'm giving him the case of a lifetime on a silver platter." The plan was set. The reckoning was coming. 3 days later, Richard Sterling sat in a plush leather chair on a brightly lit television studio set. He was preening, adjusting his expensive tie, basking in the glow. Amy Chen sat across from him, her expression a perfect mask of journalistic admiration. "Mr. Sterling," she began, "you've built an empire. You've given so much back to this community. People look up to you as a pillar of strength and integrity." "Well, I do what I can, Amy," Sterling said with a magnanimous smile. "It's about legacy, about building something that lasts." In the control room of the news station, a technician suddenly slumped over his console. A cup of coffee spilled across the floor. Oracle, dressed in a janitor's uniform, slid into his seat. He plugged a small device into the master audio board. He put on a headset and spoke into it. "We are live." In the barn, John listened, his hand resting on Max's head. In the hospital, Sarah was awake. She was watching the broadcast on a tablet Frank had brought her. Her face was still a tapestry of bruises, but her eyes were clear and hard. On the screen, Amy leaned forward. "Speaking of legacy, I want to ask you about a name from the past. Jessica Riley." Richard Sterling's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed his face. "I'm sorry. I don't know who that is." "She was a local girl," Amy pressed, her voice steady. "She disappeared 25 years ago. Some people said she was troubled, but others said she was involved with a powerful, older man." Sterling's face hardened. "This interview is over. What is this?" "This," Amy said, looking directly into the camera, "is for Jessica." At that moment, Oracle hit the switch. Richard Sterling's microphone went dead, and a new sound filled the airwaves, broadcast live to the entire state. It was the voice of a terrified teenage girl from a 25-year-old cassette tape. "Please, Richard, just leave me alone." Sterling's eyes went wide with horror. He ripped off his microphone, looking wildly around the studio. "You belong to me." His own younger voice snarled from the speakers. "You think you can just walk away? I own this town. I own you. You will do what I say, or you will disappear." Panic erupted in the studio. Producers were shouting, but the audio kept playing. The ghost in the machine was telling her story. Then, the main doors to the studio swung open. Sarah walked in. She was flanked by Frank Miller. She was wearing her hospital gown, her face a testament to the Sterling family's brutality. But she walked with her head held high, her gaze locked on Richard Sterling. The cameras, acting on instinct, swung to her. The entire state was now looking at the bruised face of a child. She stopped 10 feet from him. The audio of the tape finally clicked off, leaving a ringing silence. "I am not scared of you anymore," Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear and strong. It was the voice of a victim refusing to be a victim any longer. Richard Sterling stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. His empire was crumbling around him on live television. Another set of doors opened. Detective Miller of the State Police entered, flanked by 4 uniformed troopers. "Richard Sterling," Miller said, his voice booming in the stunned silence. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping and suspected murder of Jessica Riley. You have the right to remain silent." As 2 troopers cuffed a sputtering, defeated Sterling, Miller's radio crackled. "Sir, we have the son, Ethan Sterling, in custody, and Sheriff Brody has been arrested for obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact." It was over. The entire corrupt network had been severed at the root in one clean, decisive stroke. The aftermath was a cascade of justice. The trial was a media sensation. The tapes, the diary, Sarah's courageous testimony, and the testimony of the other victims Amy and Frank had found. It was an avalanche of truth that buried the Sterling legacy forever. Richard Sterling was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Ethan Sterling, tried as an adult, received 20 years for attempted murder and assault. Sheriff Brody and the other complicit officials were convicted on corruption charges. One afternoon, a few months after the verdict, a young man showed up at John's property. It was Travis, one of the boys who had been with Ethan during the first assault. "Mr. Creed," he said, not meeting John's eyes, I came to apologize. To you. To Sarah. I was a coward. I was scared of him. I testified against him at the trial. It's not enough, I know. But I'm sorry." John looked at the boy for a long moment. "Go home," he said, his voice not unkind. "Be a better man than you were yesterday." The boy nodded, relief and shame warring on his face, and left. A year passed. The seasons turned. The old dilapidated barn was no longer a command center. John had cleaned it out, reinforced the beams, and put in new windows. It was now the headquarters for the Maximus Project, a non-profit he had started. He was using his skills and the quiet of his land to train retired military working dogs and pair them with veterans suffering from trauma. He had found a new mission. He was bringing soldiers home. The house was filled with life. Quiet moment came at dusk. John, Sarah, quiet moment came at dusk. John, Sarah, and Max sat on the front porch. Max was old, truly old now, his gait slow, his body frail. But his eyes were bright, and his head rested contentedly on John's lap. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the tree line, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was cool and clean. The world was quiet. "I miss him," Sarah said softly, her voice barely a whisper. She was talking about her father. "I know," John said. "Me too." He looked at her, at the strong, resilient young woman she had become. He looked at the loyal dog by his side. He looked out at the land that had given them a ghost, and in doing so, had given them all a future. The storm had passed. The war was over, and in the quiet after, on a simple porch in the middle of nowhere, a broken soldier, a courageous girl, and a faithful dog had finally found their peace. They had become a family. They were home,